One of the benefits of being a fly on the wall is that it gives one an excellent sense of impartiality. The ability to look down on the comings and goings beneath one constantly observing, but permanently unobserved, allows one to remain unswayed by personal involvement. It is an enviable position, and one which permits me and my colleagues to reach philosophically valid moral judgments without risk of our ethical sensibilities being contaminated by the footling concerns that are inevitable if one allows oneself to become too embroiled. I ought to make it clear at this juncture that there is no metaphor or hyperbole at play here. I am an actual fly. We're far more articulate than we're given credit for, and I do often find myself in situ on one wall or another. Not exclusively, of course. I may also be found on the ceiling, or perched nonchalantly on the brim of a lampshade. Sometimes I content myself with just buzzing around. But I am, by any reasonable definition, a fly. A proud member of the Legion Musca Domestica. And my point stands. We flies are famed for our judicial acumen and impartiality. We could render inestimable services to the human legal and mediatory systems if only, and this is the heartbreaking part, anyone ever thought to ask us. For example, this morning I found myself, through no conscious plan or design, on the wall of some sort of workshop. Various tools were scattered across stout-looking wooden benches, and there was a smell of sawdust and grease. Further examination revealed stacks of exercise books and elementary-level volumes of a workbook manual, from which I surmised that this workshop was located within a school. The room was empty, apart from two young children, who were involved in the kind of scenario that makes a fly prick up its ears and pay close attention. Child A, as he shall henceforth be termed, was a slight and unprepossessing example of the human species. The index finger of his right hand was wedged tightly into one of the metal vices that were bolted to the woodworking benches. Child B, an altogether sturdier fellow, was manipulating the rotating lever, causing not inconsiderable comfort to Child A. Being a late arriver to the scene, I was not privy to the circumstances that had led to this state of affairs, and could not say with certainty whether Child A had willingly offered his finger to the vice, or Child B to take advantage of the situation, or Child B had somehow induced Child A into this invidious position. But no matter. One need not be in possession of the facts to make a preliminary assessment. I listened closely. "Do you beg for mercy?" said Child B in a surprisingly deep voice. Child A let out what can only be described as a squeal. "No, never!" he replied, and I could not but admire his pluck. Of course, this momentary lapse did not affect my judicial faculties. "I'll break your finger if you don't," said Child B, turning the vice's lever a quarter rotation. "I'm telling teacher!" cried Child A. This threat elicited a small chuckle from Child B. "Tell me if you want, but you'll still have a broken finger." Another quarter turn. "Ow!" yelled Child A. "Do you beg for mercy?" said Child B. Fascinating. Quite fascinating. I marshalled my thoughts to review what I had gleaned so far. Clearly, this was a nominal case of power play, but writ small. Child B, being the larger and more pugnacious of the two, could have easily demonstrated his physical superiority over Child A, had he chosen. A swift uppercut, or well-placed body blow, would have been an efficient, if unsophisticated, method of establishing supremacy. And yet, he had devised this elaborate scheme, whereby child A was permitted to concede the contest, and in doing so, suffered only minimal physical damage, thus enabling both parties to come to an agreement without costly, time-consuming and painful physical conflict. It all seemed to hinge upon this nebulous concept of mercy. Beneath me, in the thin smog of sawdust, the scene continued. "If I get a broken finger, then you'll get expelled," said Child A, taking deep breaths, evidently in some distress. "Don't care," said Child B. "I hate school, because I'm not a swot like you." "I hate it too," said Child A. "Then how come you always do your homework?" said Child B. "And get an A, like a swot." Child A stammered and writhed, but was unable to answer. "So you are a swot, and you have to beg for mercy." Child B was impressively relentless. Already I could feel my moral sense beginning to twitch, to align itself oh so subtly in one particular direction. My final decision, of course, would be backed up with rigorous judicial argument. But I have found it indispensable in many previous cases to rely, in the first instance, on my delicately nuanced instinct. It is, I hope I am not being arrogant in claiming, correct more often than it is not. So, what had we here? Protagonist and antagonist, both pursuing different goals. Child A, clearly a substandard specimen, unwisely putting himself against a far superior opponent. And Child B, who was morally entitled to use the corporal advantage conferred upon him by a biological circumstance, instead choosing to employ a ritualistic tactic, perhaps to spare the weaker combatant unnecessary suffering. In addition to this, Child A had already revealed himself to be economic, as we might charitably term it, with the truth, claiming to despise his educational establishment, only for it to emerge, seconds later, that his enthusiasm for homework, and his academic success therewith, was unsurpassed. One struggled to find any twinge of sympathy, let alone mitigation, for such a morally corrupt individual. Ow! Child A was making much of his suffering, which, though doubtless considerable, was yet to draw even a single drop of blood. "If you just begged for mercy, then we could stop," said Child B reasonably. "All right, mercy. I said it, mercy!" squealed Child A in a contemptible display of cravenness. "Say, mercy, mercy, Uncle Percy," said Child B. I was unfamiliar with the referent, but assumed that Uncle Percy was some higher authority, whom Child A had also wronged in the course of his underhand activities. "What?" Child A squirmed like an insect. "Mercy, mercy, Uncle Percy," said Child B. "Say that." "No!" shouted Child A, and there were tears in his eyes, weak, watery, cowardly tears. Child B's hand tightened on the vice. The full facts of the situation may not have been in, but nonetheless, I was ready to pass judgment. What case could have been clearer? A strong, noble, fair-minded and generous warrior versus a weak, cowardly, dishonest worm. Even a witless human could discern who was at fault in this scenario. Beneath me, I heard Child A whimper and finally, belatedly, pay the proper respects to Uncle Percy. Child B whooped with triumph and swivelled the bar counterclockwise to release the vice, and to allow Child A to collapse pitifully to the floor, clutching his not particularly injured hand. I felt a shiver of disgust at this creature, and at the same time a thrill of satisfaction seeing the victor proudly gloating over the prone body of his conquest, gleefully kicking and slapping the loser, while chanting the name of the redoubtable Uncle Percy, and glorying, as well he might, in his triumph. It is, as I have already mentioned, a source of considerable dismay to me that I and my sage colleagues are not consulted in the complex affairs of humans. But as the door to the workshop burst open, and in strode an authoritative-looking adult male, I felt a naive surge of hope that, in this case, no intervention would be necessary, even if it were possible. Surely, given such an obvious case, it would not take an insect's razor-sharp acumen to assess the moral culpability of those involved. Here, I felt confident. The mores of man and fly would align as surely as night follows day. "Come, come, my man," I wanted to cry. "Let us not dawdle, for as you see, sure as I, the rights and wrongs are as clear as crystal. The honourable victor stands strong, triumphant, yet merciful, and the scurrilous, deceitful weasel lies destroyed at his feet. The truth, in its full and unswerving majesty, stares us brazenly in the face. Lift high the champion, and let the blood of the vanquished be his wine. He is a worthy soul. May he lay waste to many more weaklings and worms before his time in this world is done. Rejoice, my good man, in strength, and may the powerful inherit the earth." Needless to say, I was somewhat disappointed in what happened. In fact, I can barely bring myself to report what took place next in the woodworking shop beneath my appalled gaze. Child A, rather than being crushed into the ground, was picked up, soothed, and allowed to hurl his baseless accusations without so much as a perfunctory beating. Upon which Child B was reprimanded severely and led away by his hair to what I could only assume was a more serious and protracted punishment. I watched this happen and felt a sickness pervade me, a malaise, you might say, of the soul. How can the world be like this? I thought. How can such injustice exist? I am, I freely admit, merely a humble fly, an impartial observer, a faithful member of the Legion Musca Domestica. I do not put on airs and graces. I do not consider myself the final word in all matters ethical. But there is right, and there is wrong. It is as clear as black and white, as night and day, as life and death. And sometimes, though I may beat my brow and beseech the ignorant to follow my quest for truth, it seems as though I am the only one in this dark, miserable world who can see it.